Hello and good evening. I'm Melisa Idris. Welcome to Consider This. This is the show where we want you to consider and then reconsider what you know of the news of the day. New ethical guidelines on suicide-related content, on reporting and sharing suicide-related content were launched recently, spearheaded by the Communications and Multimedia Content Forum of Malaysia. The guidelines aim to curb harmful reporting, reduce contagion, and promote responsible coverage across media and social platforms. Now, this comes amid growing concerns about how suicide is portrayed and shared in the digital age. So today we want to ask the question, can voluntary guidelines keep pace with virality and emotional harm online? So joining me on the show today is Mediha Mahmood, who's the CEO of the Communications and Multimedia Content Forum. Content Forum is an industry forum registered under the Malaysian Communications and Multimedia Commission. Mediha, welcome back to the show. It's good of you to join us and good to have you back on the show today.
Thank you. Very happy to be back.
So you brought a copy of the content guidelines.
Yes,
Talk to me about what prompted the need for these guidelines. And I was just wondering, when you spearheaded this process or started the process, what specific harms were you trying to address? What gaps?
All right, let me just take you a little bit back into 2022 when I think I met you as well. We were talking about the content code revamp.
Yes.
And that was smack in the middle of the pandemic when we were developing that. And during the pandemic, unfortunately, there were a lot of cases of mental health challenges. There was a lot of suicide cases. And people were talking about how suicide was being related and how it's actually harmful. So we added that to the content code. We said, there should be ethical reporting of suicide. But after that, we realized that, yes, people know it's harmful, but they don't know what's harmful. What can they do? What can't they do, right? Yeah. So when we had conversations with journalists as well, they say, we want to do good, we want to prevent harm, but we're not quite sure what we can and cannot put in. So we decided to do guidelines on ethical reporting of suicide. We sat down with a bunch of, with a working group, so there were mental health practitioners, there were broadcasters, content creators, mental health advocates, and during that process we realized that we can't just focus on the journalists and editors because the media is not the only one talking about suicide. Because like you rightfully pointed out, we've got social media, we've got people on the internet becoming mobile journalists or content creators, TikTokers, and they're talking about suicide too, and they're doing it in a harmful way. So the guidelines were then expanded beyond ethical reporting to ethical reporting and sharing of suicide-related content. So it took us a little bit more time to develop that, but we did. And I think it's really important because hopefully it will reach every single content creator out there, including us, who are content creators when we comment on posts as well.
No, I love that it was also about sharing, so not just reporting, and a recognition of the fact that influencers and content creators influence the media diet of millions of people online. And we'll come to that. I do want to start specifically with newsrooms and traditional media, if I may. When you think about, when you said that they weren't sure, media professionals weren't quite sure what was harmful, what was not, how did you explain or make those clear definitions or those clear parameters?
Okay, and I really appreciate those questions from them because it showed us that they really want to do good, it's just they didn't know how. And as usual, whenever we work in the content forum, we realize that people don't like censorship. I don't like censorship either. But if you tell them why such content is being discouraged, for example, the rationale behind it, they're much more invested in complying. So for suicide content, instead of we're not saying you need to censor your stories, these stories need to be told, but we explain the evidence behind it. There is a principle under the medical community globally has seen this. It's called the Werther effect. So the Werther effect is, some people call it copycat suicide, but it's usually when, if there's one report with a little bit of detail, maybe where and how, in the near future, in fact, in the next few days, you'll see similar suicide cases. Because I can give you an example that might be relatable. When Robin Williams, the actor, died, right? So there was so much content about his suicide. They mentioned how he died and why he died. And within the next few months, people of the same demography as Robin Williams also died by suicide in the same way. So that is one of many examples of how the weather effect works. So when we go out to journalists, we tell them this is how you guys can actually save lives by making sure your reports do not trigger any harmful behavior. And when when we had the launch, when we had the discussions with the journalists, those who didn't know, when they finally knew, and they're like, oh, we had no idea that this was actually something that is life-saving.
Yeah.
So I think that's how we approach these discussions with everybody, from media to everyone else, that we all have a role. We can play superhero here. We can actually save lives.
No, I think, I completely agree with you. I think that there are, until it's pointed out to us, we don't actually think or make conscious decisions about how we speak about it, how we report about it. Can you maybe share a bit? So it's not just limited to media professionals or us here in the newsroom, but for all media consumers.
Yes.
For them and us all to be aware what to look out for. Maybe you can talk a little bit about some of the key principles in your guidelines. You mentioned not too much explicit detail.
Yes, that's right.
And what other examples can you give us?
So I think the three main principles is, number one, do no harm. That's the first thing, and I think I've spoken about that. Number two is to preserve dignity as well. So there's a portion in the suicide content guidelines where it gives you guidelines on how to interview families who are involved with someone in their family had died by suicide.
Okay.
So there's also guidelines on how to approach that. And the third principle is to offer help, because any discussion about suicide, even the one that we're having here, the narrative is always, the objective is always to make sure that we guard lives, that no one else dies by suicide. So the objective, if we put it there, whether you're a filmmaker, which is also part of the guidelines, filmmakers, when they're writing their script, or the directors are looking at how to create a scene about suicide, they can be guided by this as well. The key is to make sure that we can prevent suicide. And for conversations like this, I should also put out there, anyone who's watching who might be feeling that they need mental health support, that's Talian Heal at 15555.
Okay.
And every single time we have a discussion about it, we need to offer these helplines as well.
Okay, so to make that kind of practice, right? How do you see it? So, correct me if I'm wrong, these guidelines are voluntary?
Yes.
So it's like an ethical code of conduct.
Correct.
How do we bridge that gap between guidelines, voluntary ethical guidelines, and on-the-ground newsroom culture?
Right.
Because sometimes under the pressure of deadlines, decisions can be quite rushed and not the can cause unintentional harm. But how do we make these principles become instinctive and not just referential?
I think that also falls down on us as well. We're one of many who need to actually push for advocacy and awareness about these issues. I mean, when we produce such a guideline, people sometimes will look at it, I'm not going to read all this, I didn't read all this. But, what we need is maybe for the media, a short toolkit or training, and at the very least, the understanding of the objective I mentioned to you, do no harm. And do no harm just basically talks about how just don't put in the details, locations, the visuals that you put out there as well needs to be very careful. So when you look at it from that lens, I think from the journalists, the photographers, to the editors, looking at that from that perspective, they can instill this into their habits.
Okay. Was this, so beyond the content code, is this the first specific topic-related guidelines that Content Forum has put out?
Okay. So we've done a couple. We've done one on the marketing of intoxicating liquor. You're not allowed to market intoxicating liquor on TV or anywhere else, but we do see these ads online. So we took it upon ourselves to sit down with the industry to talk about how, when they do this, they also need to be careful. They cannot market it to underage children, and they are encouraged not to market it to a certain demography, which is Muslims. So we had that. We also have a guideline for OCC content. OCC is online curated content.
Okay.
Sometimes it's known as OTT, but actually it's small. It's OCC. So these are the Netflix, iQIYIs of the world. We sat down with them as well to have guidelines on how they can self-regulate. But I have to say that these guidelines are the first of its kind. Very proudly saying it without trying to.
No, you should be proud. You should.
I am proud because, and I'm sharing credit with so many. We worked with the Ministry of Health. We worked with the National Center of Excellence for Mental Health. We worked with just everyone, broadcasters, content creators, psychiatrists were part of the working group. So
wow.
we're very happy that we got this done. And it's got everything from not just media, but also, like I mentioned, filmmakers. There's also a portion talking about how do you talk about suicide in a multi-faith community. Because, you know, sometimes when you talk about suicide or you interview people about suicide-related content, it always goes to they're going to be punished. Or maybe it's because they weren't faith, their faith wasn't strong enough.
Pious enough.
Exactly. You should have prayed more. You know, that kind of conversation. It makes religion look as if it's punishing those who even think of suicide. When you look at the big picture, faith, all faith actually, also embraces giving support to people who have mental health challenges, right? Helping them get out from that dark place without being judgmental about it. So we've got that in here as well.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, so it's a first time nationwide industry-led guidelines. We really appreciate MCMC and the ministries for giving us the independence to do this on our own. And we're very happy that they were there as well at the launch.
I really appreciate the multi-stakeholder collaboration consultation.
Yes.
It feels like many hands were involved, but you also listened to the many voices and the evidence.
That's right.
of science.
Exactly.
Right?
Evidence of science was the premise for it. And the great thing is we also went through a public consultation.
Okay.
So everyone in the public had a chance to have their say. So there were opportunities for us to also argue somewhat with people who were pushing against it. Because there are who may not understand and they'll say, you're editing, what can we, you know, what can we report if you can't show the photo, the location, etc., right? But when we have that conversation with them, we tell them there's so many options for you to change that narrative to one of harm and sensationalism to one of support and getting help.
No, so this is one of the paradoxes of reporting that I struggled with when earlier in my career, when I was a rookie reporter. There is a stigma around suicide that can be contributed to media silencing itself. Underreporting suicide can lead to more stigma, but irresponsible reporting of suicide can lead to copycats. So it was something that I think every reporter had to deal with and learn. And now there are guidelines, so we have a framework to refer to.
That's right. Please don't stop talking about it. It is a mental, you know, suicide is a public health issue. It needs to be talked about. But how we tell the story, that's what makes the difference.
So most guidelines, Mediha, often focus on what not to do.
Yes.
You mentioned a bit earlier, one of the key principles was what to do, meaning offer help, offer avenues and resources for help. But how would you take that further? What else can media and content creators do to maybe take away some of the stigma, but also look at suicide and mental health as a structural issue, one that it requires policy and societal change?
Yes, I think some of the media, I mean, Astro AWANI is doing a great job as well, highlight the factors behind suicide. For example, the mental health issues and how it also expands beyond. It's not homogeneous, right? You need to look at it from the gender lens as well. You need to look at it from the youth perspective as well.
Socioeconomic as well, poverty, financial,
precisely. So many, right? Those are all stories that can be told to reach the similar objective. And I think that's really something that we really look forward to. And also, I understand sometimes it's hard for stories to be built, and we say, you know, include expert opinion, etc. But then if you need to work really fast, where are you going to get those expert opinions? So that was one of the feedback that we got. So if I can just show you in the code, we've got additional resources with QR codes.
We love a QR code.
The reason it's a QR code is because it takes you to a link, and that link can be updated constantly. So it's got a list of the helplines that are available out there, not just Talian Heal. There's just so many out there who are helping out. We also have a list of experts that you can speak to. If Melissa, you want to invite someone who can talk even more in depth into the medical aspect, you can have, you know, there are experts there as well. And also people with lived experience who are happy to share their stories as well, because again, the objective is to prevent more harm.
Part of this was also not just reporting, but also the sharing of suicide-related content. So talk to me about how influencers, independent content creators who operate outside of traditional newsroom norms, how would you see them adopting these guidelines? How does it affect them?
It definitely does. Okay, so it's usually this case where when we have conversations like this, and I appreciate the way you pose that question, Because sometimes people say, how do you compel these guys to do it?
Compel.
Compel them
How
to
do
do
you
it.
ensure they take
Yes,
care of these
exactly. And then the
guidelines?
conversation goes, we need to license them or register them, which is incredibly, I get the thought behind it, but it's not practical. And again, like what I said, we need to build it into their consciousness. I always use this analogy, like, you know, content world is really loud and bright, so many creatures out there. Content forms like this Jiminy Cricket trying to sit there being the voice of conscience and say, you guys, there's a certain way to do things. But we do work with some influencers as well. We also provide training called Vibe Check. It's for ethical influencing. And, you know, we are very happy. We've worked with
ethical influencing.
Yes.
I think this is a new area that we should be looking at.
Because, you know, see, the value of influence, I think, is going to move beyond popularity and virality. You know, you got popularity, virality, that lasts for a short time. Sometimes you can go viral for a month and then nobody hears about you again. But ethics is going to be the value of influence from now on. It's just like the media. You know, if you've built a name as, like AWANI, you've built a name as a truthful, credible news source, then the long-term brand reputation is there. Right. As opposed to those who are going for the clicks, it might not last as long as it should. So we want to push ethics as the value.
That makes me reconsider or consider some of the people I follow online, and why I follow them is because of maybe some of their values and their ethics, and that makes me want to consume their content.
And they may not have millions of followers, but because you appreciate that the content that you're reading from them or consuming from them is credible and authentic, then you're there.
But that is the ideal.
Yeah.
But currently we are in an attention economy that rewards virality. And guidelines are only as effective as the willingness to comply.
That's right, correct.
What can be done to ensure that this is instinctive, as you said, right? So beyond working with just a few influencers, how can we ensure that maybe consumers themselves know what to share, what to post, and know where to draw the line?
That's right. So for us as well, we work with their public campaigns. So we also go on ground with the public, because everyone talks about how there's clickbait and rage bait, and these are the ones that are spurring people to click on bad stuff. But it's bait. Who's biting it? It's still us.
We're taking the bait.
We're taking the bait. So we all understand how algorithms work. If you like certain content, they'll push more content like that. So we're always talking to people on the hundreds of activities that we do. We always say, don't engage with content that is harmful. And if it's suicide reporting, and we've seen this happen, people do call it out. People do call out media organizations or even individuals who put pictures and stuff, right? Because there's a balance here. There are people who, let's say you post a report about suicide. There are no pictures because you're following the guidelines. Somebody will comment down that tak ada gambar ke. And then somebody else will go, oh, ada gambar, but in a different platform, for example. So we want to change that into people calling these guys out. Why are you asking for pictures? Can't you think about the family, etc.? AWANI is doing the right thing or not publishing pictures. So we want more Jiminy Crickets out there to call people out.
And that's great, because then it can be kind of public pressure that changes behavior online.
That's right. And I also have to highlight here that social media platforms such as Meta, TikTok, and all of them, they do have community guidelines specifically on suicide-related content.
I was just about to ask you how the tech platforms are engaging with this.
So they do. So if you type, let's say, something harmful, even if you type suicide in a TikTok search bar or Meta search bar, it immediately prompts you to helpline. And any topics, like, for example, related to it, like self-harm, which we also have in here, is also flagged by the algorithms. But we can't rely purely on the algorithms. It's really not enough. Again, we need to have the users who are there on the platform to flag it to the social media platforms to have it moderated or taken away. And we are having conversations with them as well, because if these guidelines can help the way their community guidelines are being interpreted, that would be something we'd be very grateful for.
So a little bit more effort from the tech companies as well. You mentioned earlier that the guidelines also cover filmmakers.
Yes.
Talk to me a bit about that.
Well, filmmaking is a huge thing, right? And it's so influential as well. I mean, I'm sure whenever we talk about suicide, people remember 13 Reasons Why. 13 Reasons Why was a few years back.
Was that a good example of, that was...
It's a terrible example.
Terrible example,
It was a terrible example to the point that there were many cases of teen suicides after that series. So Netflix actually did, they edited that scene out. There was a really long scene on the suicide. So they edited it out, and for the next season, they made sure they had everything needed to make sure that if teens or whoever it is who's watching have means to support. So that's how they regulated themselves in that sense. But we've also seen how it's being treated here locally as well. And I also understand that, you know, you want that dramatic scene as well. I totally get that. I enjoy movies myself. But again, if your scene can lead to even one death, don't you want to be able to be preventing that?
That's far too many already.
That's far too many already. Yeah. And I'm sure, I mean, we, among our members are also film associations. And, you know, I have to say that this may be voluntary to the lot out there, but it is something that needs compliance from our members. So our members have basically agreed that they will comply with this, and if they don't, we'll be there to sort of nudge their way.
Good. Yeah. Okay. Do you think that this could become a template for other sensitive reporting? I'm thinking gender-based violence, domestic abuse, child abuse even, the way we report about migrant crime and death.
You've listed everything.
Oh, okay, sorry. Well, how could it become a template? Is
Absolutely.
It, okay.
I think this was an eye-opener for me, at least, because this topic, I thought I read everything about it, but when I sit down with the working group, people with lived experience, people who are psychiatrists who are working with the ones impacted, I realize there's just so many branches out there leading to content that we should be looking at. So you've listed all of it that we're working. We're also working on with certain migrant groups as well, because reporting about migrants and refugees and immigrants can be mixed up sometimes, and it does lead to real-world consequences of stigma, stereotype, and harmful actions taken against them. So we're working with them. And absolutely, Melissa, I agree with you, online gender-based violence. In fact, gender-based violence in general is also something we need to look at.
I think of the helplines the resources that will be very helpful. We don't instinctively do it yet in the newsroom when we report gender-based violent crime. We don't instinctively put something up there, but it would be great to have this as practice.
As practice. I mean, even if you say it, that's great, but even just a line at the bottom of the screen might help someone out there.
Fantastic. Okay, so what else are you, I mean, you've already done quite a lot in the half of the year that most of us are still getting going, but for Content Forum, what is it that you are looking at next? And I'm always interested to know what you're doing, is because this is such a time of evolution for content, because you're not just dealing with kind of traditional media, but content from everyone with a phone is a content creator, essentially. And in the age of AI and deepfake and all of that, how are you managing your priorities and what you're focusing on?
Wow, yes, that's a loaded question. There's several things that we are working on, several fronts. You mentioned most of them. Protection for children online. And when we talk about that, we always talk about how children are accessing harmful content, which is very important for us to address. But it's also how children are portrayed online as well, in content as well. You see the rise of kidfluencers, children being used as influencers, exploited for
commercial gain.
Commercial gain. So we're looking at that as well. But I think the biggest project or initiative that we're on, last time it was 2022 when we did the content code revamp. This year we're reviewing the content code again, because I think last year, I'm sure you're well aware, that there were several laws being amended to curb or to address online harms. There's the Communications and Multimedia Act, the way they've redefined things, for example, grossly indecent, what does that mean? There's also the online safety bill that should be effective soon. So there are a lot of things, even the penal code, there's so many laws that were amended. So we need to make sure our content code is aligned as well. And AI. In 2022, AI wasn't a thing.
So when the content code was being kind of revamped, it wasn't the age of AI just yet. We were dealing with the pandemic and trying to deal with the rise of influencers and online content.
That's
now we have
it's completely different.
What's
You're
next?
Right. 2022, nobody figured out that AI was going to come. I think only later we had that ridiculous AI Will Smith video eating spaghetti, which looked awful. But now there are deep fakes using us, if possible, right? So we've got to look at that as well. And at the same time, we want to make sure that we don't overreact, because sometimes, AI is a new tool. But there are some principles that we already have embedded into the content code, like misleading advertisements. Whether you use AI or Photoshop or whatever it is, if it misleads, it's a bad thing, right? So we want to make sure we don't over-regulate the technology, because
like a knee-jerk reaction to something new we don't know.
That's right. So we don't believe that policy making works if it's knee-jerk and too quick. We need to make sure it's evidence-based. We speak to everyone involved, not just the ones who feel impacted by AI, but also people who are doing AI. And what are the safeguards or guardrails that they are already putting in? We need to have the big picture.
Does it feel overwhelming sometimes for you? Because it's coming in all directions and all times of the day.
It really does. But I have to say that we have really good support from the industry. Our members are fantastic. Whenever we have to do these policy-making things, they are involved as well. We've got support from the government. I love the fact that they're giving us the independence to do this industry-led, because they do trust us that we will speak to the public, we'll speak to civil society, and hopefully have something that everybody can agree with, as at least that's the best practice for now.
Wonderful. Mediha, it's always such a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you so much for coming to tell us about these suicide content guidelines and for providing us with this tool so we're better equipped in the future.
Our pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
That's all we have for you on this episode of Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris, signing off for the evening. Thank you so much for watching. Good night.